Hello guys. A lot of Spaniards are toxic metaframers, and that is something that I didn't realize in the past. But I've become an expert in toxic metaframing. But nowadays, over 80 to 90% of people are toxic metaframers. For the people who don't know what is toxic metaframing, I'm going to explain it now. Toxic metaframing is basically toxic metaframing is, first I'll say what type of toxic metaframes there are. There's indirect, direct, verbal and non-verbal. And you will see I have earplugs right now, and I have it since 1 p.m. now. It's already it's like 6 p.m. or something, and for 5 hours the Spaniards have been doing a lot of noise. They brought a quad which smells. They go through nature here with the quad, so destroying nature also. And I'm gonna say something super interesting. First I'll explain toxic metaframing, because if you understand toxic metaframes, you will understand how to spot toxic people, and especially also narcissists, and how to avoid them. So what it is basically the toxic metaframer is usually more unconscious as to what they're doing, and what's going on is that they think themselves, consciously or unconsciously, purposefully or unpurposefully, more important than the other person. Their feelings, their being, they see as more important. And with a trauma attached, okay, I think it's continuing. Very cool. My notebook just shut off, but it seems to be continuing very nicely now. So you have toxic metaframing: indirect, direct, verbal, non-verbal, those 4 types. And the toxic metaframers thinks themselves, consciously or unconsciously, more important than the other person. So I can make a lot of noise. I don't care what the other person thinks, because my emotions, my freedom is more important than the other. And it's very interesting, because in the French culture, this doesn't exist that much. In the Spanish culture, and I didn't know this 20 years ago when I studied in Spain, it exists much, much more. For example, you come into a Spanish shop. The Portuguese can be like this as well, but they're much more toned down. So, for example, I'm going to give you various examples of toxic metaframes. You come into a Spanish supermarket, a family's right next to you, and the father screams right into my ear, calling someone else in the store much further apart. So he's totally unconscious as to my necessities, my kind of like let's call them like decent human interaction, you could call it. And the French, interestingly, they don't have that. They have this kind of like eloquent, very caring about what the other person might feel. It's very educated, and I would say more higher IQ kind of behavior. And what I noticed is 20 years ago when I studied here, I didn't know about these kind of energetic things. And as I got older and I became an energy healer and understood how these things interconnect, and how the dynamic of everything is, I was like, oh, okay. And this is super interesting, because you will be able to spot toxic people and narcissists on the spot. And so, for example, when somebody comes into your zone, because I've been here first, they came here, they set up shop, they made, with 2 cards and set up everything here, made a whole they came with kids. Okay, kids are gonna make a lot of noise, but it's also a question how you educate them. right? And and it's definitely culturally ingrained oftentimes as well, but it's still a toxic metaframe. So it's kind of like that. I assume, well, in this case, making a lot of noise and encroaching on the space of someone else without consideration to the other person is basically, in this case, it's indirect, nonverbal toxic metaframing. A direct verbal toxic metaframe would be, you will never amount to anything. Okay? And behind toxic metaframes, not all the time, because if you're super unconscious, it's different, but sometimes it's kind of like also, it has to do with libido empowerment and libido suppression. If the person is very libido suppressed, they will search and project towards another person, and they will be like, so let's say you are, let's say, just as an example, say you are a father that hates his life, then you have a son who's very happy. So the son is libido empowered, and the father's libido suppressed. He will try to suppress in the libido the son. So he'll say, you will never amount to anything, you suck. So he's projecting his own trauma onto the other person and trying to suppress them, instead of working on their own trauma and raising the frequency in the relationship. And that's the status quo in almost all of society. And that's why I'm saying 80 to 90% of people are toxic, and you have to concentrate on the 10% of people that are non-toxic. And there's about 5 to 10% that are non-toxic. Everyone else, super toxic. And the reason is because they're unhappy in their life, and they have a libido suppression, and they're looking for others to suppress them. Same thing happens when you're 5-6 days of the week when you're libido suppressed, because you work and you don't like the work, etc. And then the weekend comes, you feel like, this is my time, I can do what I want, I don't care about others, I don't care about nature, I just need to vent basically that energy. And it's super interesting because I've become an expert in recognizing it, and sooner or later people, sometimes not immediately, but eventually they will toxic metaframe, because they have an inability to come into their joy and sexuality. That's the libido suppression. So if you recognize yourself toxic metaframing someone else, direct, indirect, verbal, non-verbal, then you will have that as a like an instrument to see that you're not in your happiness, you're not in your libido empowerment. And you need to find out how to increase joy in your life, but true joy. And make that your life kind of goal. And I've become kind of a hermit, because I cannot stand this toxic energy in society anymore. I live very reclusive, because I cannot stand this energy anymore. It's really annoying. And what I noticed is, going back and forth between Portugal and Spain, that the Portuguese are much more toned down and much more, I mean, you will get it sometimes, but usually it's much more toned down. It's also because the population is less, and on the countryside, people a little bit older, they're a little bit settled in. The Spaniards are often in the cities, they're very young, and they're much more energetic. And but I noticed that there is the toxic metaframe behind it, and the reason is because the Spaniards have a much higher libido in the sacral chakra, and when it's not fulfilled, they feel a tremendous need to like, they feel very if the libido is high but it doesn't get fulfilled, the libido suppression feels so much more intense. And that's a super, super interesting understanding. I'm going to give a couple of toxic metaframe examples so you understand what I mean. So when a person does, for example, like, or like, there's like a body scan without saying anything, that's a non-verbal direct toxic metaframe. Or when you say, gosh, look at you, girl, like, what do you look like? Or something like that. That's a toxic metaframe. You'll never amount to anything. Toxic metaframe. Everything you do is shit. Toxic metaframe. Toxic metaframes are often packaged into generalizations because it's so much easier to push the other person down if you generalize it. Yeah, like, everything you do is like crazy. Forget about doing anything because everything you do sucks. Those are kind of like the ones. And the best way, the absolute best way to deal with toxic metaframers is to not engage at all. Even so far that you say, disengage completely, remove yourself physically, because the person is unconscious and it's not in their soul plan, that the consciousness is so high that they will realize what they're doing. So it's very important to completely disengage. No taking calls, no doing calls, no meeting them. If it's in a family, if it's in the workplace, reduce to absolute minimum. And if that doesn't work, change the place. Complete disconnection. Because if you start to understand toxic metaframing, your energy vibration, your consciousness is increasing. And as it increases, you need to move into a new environment. And this is super important. And then that increased consciousness, you need to start to reflect it in all of your areas of your life. Your partner, your lifestyle, your work, the people you hang out with, the place you're at, because otherwise you're going to constantly be drawn back in. And what we're having now in society is that there's a certain consciousness being raised with certain individuals, let's call them star seeds, that have come in with a high vibration right from the start, and they're starting to disconnect a lot from the matrix people. Those are the kind of COVID jab people, and the chasm, I think it's called chasm between those two types of people is becoming stronger and stronger. To me, it's so intense that I cannot live with other people, normal people anymore. I've changed so much. It's unbelievable. And I already sense it by the deep desire to be in my loving energy, away from these people, because they're way too unconscious to recognize what they're doing. And so what I'm doing here now is teaching you to recognize it in others and in yourself, and maybe you get it, and that will like raise your consciousness, because you will be like, this is an aha moment. This is where like a revelation, where you're like, oh my fucking god, now I understand like this energy. And again, it starts with the libido suppression in the sacral chakra, and you start to project hate towards the others or try to push them down because you're not in your happiness, right? And that's the origin of toxic metaframing. And in this case, for example, it's literally a high unconsciousness in which people come into nature and they feel like entitled because they have a shitty work week, and they feel entitled to be loud, to be obnoxious, and it's literally this idea: I am more than the other. I am more than nature. I'm more than the other person that was there before. I'm allowed to make noise. I'm allowed to play loud music, all of this stuff. And yeah, so my advice to people out there that want to spiritually grow is to recognize toxic metaframing in others, recognize where it comes from, recognize it in yourself, recognize that the origin is usually deep down unhappiness in themselves, or just karmic kind of cultural conditioning by bad education and all of that stuff. And in some cultures, toxic metaframing has become part of regular kind of especially with younger people, it's become a very regular common thing to interact this way, like you loser or whatever, you know, you loser. That's very direct verbal toxic metaframe. And so I hope you enjoyed this video. Not everybody understands toxic metaframing. I received tons of toxic metaframes on the internet, on YouTube, and the reason is because so many people and a lot of guys on YouTube, they're extremely unhappy in their life. Maybe they're not even recognized